name is Jasmine D. Evans, Strategic Communications Consultant and creator of the Degrees with Less Debt video series. Today, we're at Maryville University, where we're talking all things affordability, the challenges and barriers it creates, and what institutions and communities can do to connect more students to degrees with less debt.
Hello, my name is Keyshawn Spraggins. I am 20 years old. I will be a junior at McKendree University. I'm studying business management and entrepreneurship. My family thoughts on being in college or having a higher education is very, very high. They push forward and they want you to have a higher education because they feel as if that the higher education you get, the more doors opens for you. And I totally agree with them on this.
Hello, my name is Trinity Brooks. I'm a third-year student at Maryville University of St. Louis, where I'm currently double majoring in early childhood and elementary education with a minor in communications. Some of the challenges that I have experienced paying for college are few and far between. I know a lot of people talk about having to work multiple jobs just to kind of stay afloat, and they don't really understand, Fafsa and stuff like that. I will say coming into college, it was a little bit difficult for me to understand some things as related to loans and also understanding grants. I didn't realize that you could write grants or you could apply for grants, and I feel like if that would have been explained to me a little bit more in depth, then I would have definitely taken that road as well.
My name is Charles Blackman. I am 22 years old and I attend Southeast Missouri State University, and I am a social work major. For college, I just had the big opportunity of receiving many different scholarships, some ongoing, some not. These scholarships have been very impactful. SEMO, I feel, is compared to the rest of them, are most affordable colleges in Missouri.
Whatever a student's chosen career path, be it a teacher, an art historian, a barber, or even a welder, it'll more than likely require some form of training past high school. In fact, 2/3 of all good jobs, meaning jobs that pay a livable wage, require some form of post-secondary education, certification, or training.
People often ask if, given the cost, is a college degree still worth it? And studies show that are repeated actually quite frequently that the answer to that question is absolutely yes. On an individual level, a student with a college degree over a lifetime will out-earn someone with only a high school diploma by about $900,000. And that financial argument is compelling. But there's another one that makes me so passionate to do this work, which is that having a college degree contributes to the public good.
Why does a post-secondary degree matter? Well, there's a bunch of research that will tell you why. Adults with post-secondary degrees earn more money. They are more recession-proof. As citizens, they vote more often. They have better health outcomes. Their children have better educational outcomes. So there's a whole long list of why it matters. But I've been doing this work long enough to really experience why it matters. I have worked with kids when they're 15, 16, and just beginning to shape those dreams. And then they pursue post-secondary degrees. They find new passions. They run into obstacles. They learn, they grow. And I've seen them become trailblazers in their families. Become the first lawyers in their families, become the first teachers in their families, become the first community organizers, become the first principals of the St. Louis public schools in their families. And for me, that's why it matters.
So it's clear that there are both public and private benefits that accrue to post-secondary education completers. The real question is about how do we balance those two things and how do we value them as we look across the spectrum. I believe that if we expect to have an equitable and democratic society into the future, it is crucial that we focus more on the public benefits of post-secondary education and the support that that brings with it.
While identifying post-secondary education options are already challenging enough, the biggest barrier is often figuring out how to pay for it. For many Black and low-income students, the barriers and challenges of affordability often prohibit students from figuring out post-secondary options or leaving them with crippling amounts of student debt.
My name is Sabrina, and I am a senior at the University of Central Missouri, majoring in psychology with a minor in family development. And what has been the biggest challenge with affording college is literally just that, just being able to afford it, because I have no family help or assistance for being here. So I'm literally here on my own willpower and scholarships and working.
College affordability is the biggest threat to low-income students, both in terms of attending college and completing a degree. We currently have a system that expects low-income families to spend nearly 60% of their annual household income in order to send their son or daughter to a four-year university. And that's simply outrageous. The obvious challenge that we face with college affordability is the rising cost of higher education. The price of college tuition has been increasing 4 times faster than median household income over the last few decades. So we are literally pricing students out of higher education at this point. Our system of financial aid has not been able to keep pace with the rising cost of college, and this situation has presented significant access and persistence barriers for students from low-income households. The Pell Grant continues to be the foundation of need-based financial aid in our country, but unfortunately, it has lost much of its buying power. The Pell Grant used to cover approximately 70% of the total cost of attendance at public four-year colleges and universities in the late 70s and early 80s. However, the Pell Grant only covers about 25% of the total cost of attendance today. And this has forced many students and their families to make up the difference by taking on more debt in the form of student loans and credit cards. And students are working more hours per week to try to make ends meet. But ultimately, college affordability really means to me providing students with adequate financial aid where they don't have to work too much to take away from their educational experience, and they also don't have to take on unmanageable loan debt that will impact their lives in a negative way after they graduate.
Between 1989 and 2016, the total cost of a college education at a four-year institution, including tuition and fees, room and board, and all other living expenses, have doubled once you consider the cost of inflation.
When making post-secondary plans, high school students will often prioritize the characteristics of an institution that match their interests, such as the type of institution, location and size, majors and degree programs, and campus activities. However, it's critical to include financial decisions in these plans because affordability and knowing how to pay for post-secondary education can make or break a student's ability to actually enroll into an institution and ultimately complete a degree or credential. You don't know what you don't know. First-generation college students and low-income students face actual and perceived financial barriers to pursuing a post-secondary education, and these barriers often stem from not being aware of the resources available to make college more affordable and accessible.
Financial aid can be confusing, and funding higher education is a challenge for everyone, especially low-income students and first-generation students. The sooner the better for students to start researching and having conversations about college costs and options to pay for college.
One of the main barriers our students face when considering what college to attend is affordability. And while other students are selecting colleges based on match and fit, oftentimes our first generation low-income Black students are having to select students largely or solely based on which institution offers them the best financial aid package. And so even with these packages, sometimes our students are still left with a gap in aid. And so students and their families are having to use out-of-pocket funds to cover that gap. And the problem with this is that our families, these types of families, are already 3 times more likely than their white counterparts to be at or below the federal poverty line. So these students are at more of a disadvantage than other students that have to pay when it comes to coming to pay for college out of their pocket. And this can be a very detrimental barrier. And unfortunately for some of our students, that barrier, that affordability barrier, or that paying out of pocket barrier will prevent some of our students from even attending the college of their choice.
As the cost of college increases, the difference is often transferred over to students and their families. In fact, since the recession of 2007 and 2008, federal government funding of higher education has drastically been reduced, also increasing the amount of student debt transferred over to students and families.
The challenges that I have faced paying for college have been multiple different challenges. Some challenges that I've come across is acquiring loans and private loans and interest-free loans, and having the ability to understand how loans work. I've also come across challenges on getting scholarships and grants. Sometimes they're not as easy to acquire or even find. Another thing that I've had is I work multiple on-campus jobs to pay for my bill for the semester and for the school year.
I have worked in student financial aid since 1975. Over the years, the national commitment to education has shifted as the cost of education has risen at a rate that outstripped the state and federal commitment to affordability. The responsibility for the cost of education has shifted more and more to the institution and ultimately to the family and the students themselves.
Historically, college has been considered a public good. Unfortunately, over the last 30 to 40 years, state support for colleges has decreased for both public and private institutions. For example, when I began at Southeast, support for the institution from the state was over 60%. Now it's barely 30%. So unfortunately, some of that cost has been shifted to students. Also, the idea of aid being free is no longer free. So it's made the expense of college considerable, especially for low-income and first-generation students.
So the question then becomes, how do you pay for college when you've exhausted all of your means? And typically the answer is to find more scholarships. But in reality, that the likelihood of that happening is just not real. And here's why. Oftentimes our first generation or first income and Black students take on family obligations because their parents are working multiple jobs, or they're working full-time jobs that require long hours just so they can make ends meet. And so our students are often tasked with helping their families by either caring for their younger siblings before and after school, or they are also working to contribute to their household to pay bills or other things. So this leaves very little time for our students to participate in sports or extracurricular activities, anything that will help to give them a competitive edge when applying for scholarships.
Today, paying for college often requires a mix of financial resources. To access those resources, students must fill out the free application for federal student aid, also known as the Fafsa.
So the gold standard in financial aid world is the Fafsa. We always encourage students, they need to complete the Fafsa first and foremost, because that really kicks off a lot of the different things that a student can be eligible for. And so the Fafsa is a free application for federal student aid, and it determines the expected family contribution, or the EFC. And that's the number that we use in our office to determine the eligibility that students have for things like the Pell Grant or state grants or some institutional need-based aid. And so that's one of the first things we tell a student if they're wanting to know how they can get financial aid is they need to complete the Fafsa.
Hi, my name is Kirby Cooper and I study education at Maryville University in St. Louis. So the biggest challenge I had for paying for school was just having the necessary funds available. So I never had a college fund or any money put aside while I was growing up to pay for college. So I kind of had to figure it out right before school started. So the biggest help I received was from filling out the Fafsa and receiving loans. So I got federal loans as well as private loans. And then something else that helped was actually I got a work-study job on campus, and so that helped pay for expenses as well.
For students to make informed financial decisions that'll impact them and their families for years to come, they need information about financial aid that is timely and relevant.
The problem we see as it pertains to financial aid on an individual student level is how the process is so unnecessarily opaque. I mean, we're talking about 4,000 different institutions of higher education serving 14 million students. There is not a single body who's responsible for consistency in how financial aid is awarded and how it's communicated. A few years ago, You Aspire and the New America Foundation did a study that just looked at 11,000 different award letters. And what they found is there was one particular type of loan that was listed 136 different ways on award letters, and many of them not even calling it a loan. So if a student doesn't know which money in their award letter is free money through a grant versus money they're going to have to pay back, how can they be expected to make a smart situation around finance?
So of course, working in the financial aid office, we service a lot of low-income students and a lot of Black students. And it is definitely our goal to make sure that we are assisting them from point A to point Z of the financial aid process. Also making sure that not only they access it, but they are persisting all the way through college graduation. So our office does that by making sure, one, we're giving them all the financial opportunities. Most of our students walk through the door, they kind of know about the Pell Grant, they know about the state grants, it's already there. But what we kind of have to coach them on is other opportunities outside of federal and state funding. There's scholarships out there, and we're going to make sure we stay abreast so that you know about those. We also make sure we become familiar with our campus programs that we have that cater to Black students and also cater to low-income students, such as our TRIO programs, our college-bound programs. So sometimes there could be services that they need besides financial aid that they come to us for. We try to make sure we create good partnerships or relationships with them to say, hey, this is a person I know over in TRIO program, go reach out to them. Or this is a person I know in this program, go reach out to them, and build those connections and that student support for the actual student.
So institutional aid is really important when we're talking about financial aid offers that are made to students. If a student's comparing from one school to the other, a lot of the aid that they receive is going to be consistent, such as like the Pell Grant or Access Missouri. Those things, if they go from one four-year institution to another, those numbers are going to be the same. But it's that institutional aid that can set a school apart.
I was fortunate enough to receive a scholarship that pays for the majority of my collegiate career. So my 4 years are paid for basically. And I guess before that, I was just kind of in a frenzy trying to figure out how I was going to pay for college.
What has benefited the most is obviously scholarships and needs-based scholarships. And when I say that, it's not just merit-based or based on what you've done. It's pretty much based on what you need. And those are helped me a lot. And having someone to be able to explain to me what these financial aid terms mean, or things like that. I thankfully am a TRIO student, so my TRIO advisor worked very closely with me to be able to explain to me what Pell Grant is, what subsidized and unsubsidized is, how to find other scholarships, how to fill out an application, these things. My advisor really broke it down to me and explained to me what all that means. So that was also very helpful and what has helped me with finding funding, applying for funding, and being able to continue to enroll semester after semester.
How's it going? I'm Xavier Payne, and the first question is, as a recent college graduate, how do you feel about student debt? Honestly, my only worry or concern with student debt right now is how to pay it off. Just because with all the stuff that's going on with COVID, not many jobs are letting people come in, and it's kind of hard for a lot of people who just graduated to get a full-time job. I was luckily able to get a full-time job, but not everyone's just as lucky as me. So I think my biggest thing is paying that off, and then it's a new bill coming into our lives, and it's something that you have to pay. It's not like I can just forget about it. That when that bill comes in, it has to get paid. And so I think my biggest worry was just adding that payment on to what I already pay for rent and whatever other bills and utilities that I pay for now, and just making sure that I plan my bills or I plan my paychecks so that when those bills do hit, when they do send that bill for, oh yeah, it's time for you to pay off your loans, I have the money to pay off my loans. I'm not making myself struggle to pay my loans.
So often the debt load is determined by family income and the ability to contribute to the education. As I mentioned earlier in the Pell, the idea that a family can contribute 30% of their income to student in college is just unaffordable. Among Black families, so often there is an inability to receive other kind of outside private loans So have to go a subsidized route, which makes it more difficult for the students to get that loan. Also, scholarships are necessarily seen as need-based and more merit-based. And the idea that a student has to have a certain ACT and GPA to receive that award is challenging for some students coming from backgrounds that don't give them the support they need to reach the educational level to earn those scholarships.
Private scholarships can greatly reduce the amount of student loans that a student may have to take out to pay for their education. In Missouri, we have a website called myscholarshipcentral.org.
Scholarship Central is a free scholarship search and application tool for Missouri students. It's a collaboration between 3 scholarship foundations and over 40 community scholarship providers. Students complete a general application and then have the opportunity to apply to more than 130 different scholarship and interest-free loan programs.
What can institutions do to make college more affordable? Actually, turns out there's a lot they can do.
First, it starts at the beginning with the awards process. Just having a more concise awards letter, really breaking down what everything means to the students and for the families, loan versus grant. Spell out everything, no abbreviations, no acronyms, because they're not going to understand what those things mean. If you're getting a grant, where is the grant coming from? Or if I'm getting a scholarship, what are the requirements for me to be able to maintain my scholarship? If I lose it, am I able to get it back? Textbook rental is a huge thing as well. I know when I was a student at my university, we had a textbook rental system, and that really helped me out. So instead of paying $200-300 for a book, I was paying $200-300 a semester for all of my books. Also prioritize need-based grants. I know now we're kind of focusing more on merit-based grants, but we need to focus back on more of the need-based grants for the students that really need it.
First of all, it's how financial aid is awarded. Awarding it on basis of need is hugely important. And there is another component, not only for students at the point of admission, but really putting dollars to retention.
We realized that unmet need was our most significant persistent barrier for low-income students. We also had a major issue with hundreds of seniors exhausting their federal Pell Grant each year before they could finish their degree. Therefore, we created financial aid programs specifically to address these issues.
Institutions, including Southeast, have made a move towards using more test optional options. And so, for instance, we have moved to where now a student can have no test score, but still be eligible for merit aid up to $3,000. And so more institutions are moving towards just looking at the high school GPA rather than test score, because we know there are inherent biases with tests often that lead to students not necessarily being able to show what their true academic ability is. And we know that high school GPA is a good indicator that a student's going to be successful as they go throughout their college education.
Maryville University is working in a number of ways to make college more affordable. One of those ways is that we have recently reduced the GPA requirement for students to maintain their scholarships. For years, the GPA requirement was between a 3.0 and a 3.5 to maintain a scholarship. We recently changed that to a 2.5 because students who are earning a 2.5 GPA are making successful progress toward their degree. And without the money to support them, they won't be able to stay. So we're very excited that we changed that GPA requirement so they can keep the money and pursue their degree to persist to graduation.
We all know how confusing and complex financial aid can be, and at Mizzou, we continually strive to make it less so. We've made several changes to our financial aid strategies, and beginning with the Fall 20 class, we will meet the same percentage of need received the first year for subsequent years, as long as there's no significant change to the family expected contribution. We want to help students have a financial plan to not only enroll at Mizzou, but also persist until graduation.
I think there are a number of things that colleges can do to reduce those barriers to degree completion, and chief among them is to invest. Literally, put your money where your mouth is. If you want Black students, if you want brown students, if you want low-income folks, if you would like to have your campuses be welcoming, then you ought to be investing real dollars into the hands and pockets of those students, and then also to a greater extent real dollars into the services, the people, the programs that help them to survive and thrive. So programs like TRIO, programs like tutoring, campus clubs and organizations that support marginalized students without pushing them further on the margins of education and then society as a whole. I think colleges and universities must right now begin to divest from merit-based financial aid. Look at the literature. It tells you, the research talks all day long. Merit-based financial aid tends to help students who are already going to go to college. If our goal is to increase the pool of folks who are going to go to college, then we ought to be investing in folks who literally cannot come without that money. And so it doesn't make sense, if we all know we have a limited amount of resources, why would we be giving those resources to folks who can afford to pay the bill?
Students need guidance, and that support doesn't always have to come from the financial aid office. Colleges and universities that stood out in the degrees with less debt research have applied a holistic approach to student financial aid understanding.
If colleges could use financial aid, career services, or even just TRIO, whatever offices other colleges have, if they could utilize those resources and reach out to students, I think that would go a long way.
Although affordability is a barrier to students pursuing a higher education degree, it is not the only barrier. Holistic support is key to the success of students at Maryville University and at every institution of higher education. Holistic support of our students is key not only to recruit students, but for the retention, persistence, and graduation of Black students, low-income students, and first-generation students.
I feel that the biggest thing that colleges can do is to help host seminars. So I know at least at SEMO, financial aid and career services, on top of other offices like TRIO and SSS, they held seminars which talked about life after college. They brought in professionals to talk about life after college and how they handled some of their things. And I think that was truly beneficial for me, just because now knowing that my bills are going to be kicking in soon, I'm not worried. I'm not stressed at how am I going to pay it, because I've gone through different seminars of listening to people talk and figuring out, okay, this is how you're going to pay this.
There have been major impacts on returning to school. One of the biggest impacts is the fact that being back on campus has brought a sense of normality to the pandemic and to life in general. Being in-person classes has brought something that has not only been kind of scary, but also exciting, to be able to be back and to be prepared to go back to school sort of as normal as we can. Another impact it has had is, like, financially, it's been kind of a struggle. Due to the pandemic, I've gotten my own room this year, so that made my cost in schooling and in tuition and housing go up highly, because of the fact that I wanted to have my own room to where I didn't have to worry about sharing a room and having a roommate.
So there are so many things as an institution of higher education we can do to support our students financially through this pandemic. One is paying attention to our students' needs. During the pandemic, our students are experiencing financial hardship like no other. They are going through housing insecurities, food insecurities, employment insecurities. So all of that wraparound, we're going to need some wraparound dollars. So take a look at the institutional funding. That's where financial aid offices or foundation offices have the most flexibility. When it comes to state and federal, it's not that flexible, but you can work around it with your institutional dollars. So take a look at your funding policies. Do you need to go to the board? Do you need to ask for more flexibility with how you administer those funds? If the funds are sponsored by donors, it doesn't hurt to reach out to the donors to say, hey, we know that you have a scholarship with us and this scholarship is for these particular parameters. Would you mind making an exception due to COVID-19? This is where we see our students' needs are. And you adjust those funding pots of money to those students' needs.
Listen, 2020 has not been an easy year. It hasn't been easy for state agencies, for communities, or for higher education. and it certainly hasn't been easy for students, especially Black and low-income students. But what does give me hope is that in many ways, our communities and institutions have proven their collective resiliency through their rapid response efforts, while maintaining a focus on student success. And in times of challenge, we always find new ways of working, new ways to meet our goals, and suddenly some of our most far-fetched ideas become a touch more possible.
My name is Jasmine D. Evans, Strategic Communications Consultant and creator of the Degrees with Less Debt video series. It's been an honor to spend today with you, talking all things affordability, the barriers and challenges it represents, and what institutions and communities can do so we can all lend our collective parts to graduate more students with degrees with less debt. Until next time.